All right, very excited, very exciting to connect with Jessi here, one of the power users of the MOLTEN platform and one of my favorite people to work with. So Jessi, welcome to the chat.
Thanks, Arjun.
Hope you have a hot beverage with you. You'll need
it. I do. My jar.
All right, so the topic of today's conversation is distribution and the shifting streaming landscape. It's sort of a leading topic. It's already suggesting there's some shift we're going to be talking about. So hopefully we can dive into some nuances there. To set the context, the reason I'm very excited about this conversation today is because quite often when we have these coffee chats, we stay at the strategic level. And what I'm hoping to do today is get into the nuances, get into the actuals, the nitty gritties of some of these operations. And for the folks in the audience, please feel free to use the Q&A button in Zoom. Post your questions there throughout the conversation. We will leave at least 15, 20 minutes, if not more, to take questions from the audience towards the latter half of the conversation. And with me, I have Colby and Hannah as well, who may just respond to some questions in the Q&A directly, and will surface the questions that we can tackle in the conversation. All right, so with that, let's get started. First off, Jessi, I'd love for you to just talk a little bit about yourself.
Well, I've been with Allied Vaughn for 3 years now, 3.5, somewhere in there. And I started out in MOD onboarding, and as the company started to grow, I kind of started to grow with it. So when COVID hit, everything kind of changed and we got super busy. So I was working in MOD onboarding quite a bit. So I have a very good relationship with most of our content providers, and we have around 200.
For the audience, sorry, what is MOD?
Media on demand, which is Blu-rays and DVDs, and we print them as they're ordered. So we'll start out with a small bunch of inventory, and then we'll print them as they're ordered from our retailers. So we do manufacturing of movies, TV shows, specialty features. We just started doing 4K prints, so that kind of stuff. Everybody thought it was a dying industry, but when COVID hit, that really, it proved everybody wrong. People still like having stuff in their hands. That's kind of crazy. Yeah. But we have about 250, roughly around there, content providers, pretty much all major studios and a lot of mid-range studios. And we even take just independent filmmakers, because you never know, dime a dozen, there could be diamond in the rough, you know? So we always take everybody and we treat everybody with the same amount of customer service as we do everybody else. So it's fun, actually. When MOD started blowing up and COVID hit, everybody was jumping on the streaming. And we had already set up streaming before COVID, but we weren't focusing on it a lot. We were dabbling with it. So towards the end of 2020, I jumped in to kind of wrangle it and figure out what we were going to do. And that's when we contacted you guys and started working with MOLTEN to get set up to streamline it a little bit better. Most of our clientele still focus on MOD mostly for the print side of it, but we have about 60 of our content providers that we're servicing for streaming now. And it's going really good, you know. It's a crazy landscape. So yeah. I call it a jungle.
We'll dive into the craziness a little bit today. So basically what you're saying is you were a specialist in printing DVDs and Blu-rays on demand. And while that business continued to grow, you entered into the streaming era about 2-3 years ago.
Yeah, and I specialize in the asset management, or like the asset collection. Okay. So I have a design background. I started out as a graphic designer when I was 19. So just kind of moving that up throughout my life. But so I make sure that everybody is assets that they're submitting to us are the way they're supposed to be, and I help them fit all the specs. And the great thing about Allied Vaughn is we have services to help our content providers if they don't have means to make graphic assets. We can help them, and we have a team of designers that I also oversee and make sure that they can help out with that when our content providers need that. And we have an authoring team too that does DVD and Blu-ray authoring.
Yeah.
So yeah, we're kind of a full service, and that goes over into VOD as well. As you know, with VOD, there's a ton of assets depending on how many platforms you work with. So
Yeah.
that's been a big challenge, is helping everybody manage all the specs to conform.
Yeah. So is it fair to say you're the go-to?
I think he's saying I'm the go-to gal, and yes, I am the go-to gal. When people need to submit titles to Allied Vaughn, they call me or email me.
Yeah, I was going to say he probably is going to have to switch networks real quick, but I'll jump in here too. We did get a question about, I mean, I'm sure you get different specifications and requirements around video content, and each platform is different in what they're requiring. So, for example, is 4K or HD? We had someone kind of ask about that. And I mean, no, that's something, again, while Arjun's getting his network, maybe we can just answer that real quick.
I'm not seeing a lot of platforms that want 4K yet. The storage for that is pretty large. So HD definitely, but 4K I think is still a little bit on the cusp, just because storage alone is kind of crazy. But I foresee that happening eventually. I mean, they're making TVs that are 8K now, so.
All right. Hopefully I'm on a more stable network now. I just changed over. Okay. So let's keep going. So essentially you're the go-to person for all asset management for deliveries. Is that fair to say as well?
Well, yeah, when it comes to the VOD side, I also, our team sets up the deliveries with you guys, and then you guys deliver them out to our platforms.
Sure. So all the content, all the assets, all the deliveries, all the artwork, is there anything that we're missing in the scope? And I'm just trying to, set the context here so we know what areas to dive into.
Oh yeah, metadata too.
Metadata, right.
Metadata, yeah. Feature files, trailers,
Features, trailers, sizzle reels, promos, all that good stuff.
Yeah.
And then are we also talking about avails when we say metadata?
Yes. Keeping track of avails on who's been submitted for what, where, and when. Yeah, it's a lot to keep track of.
There's a lot to keep track of here. So for anyone keeping tabs, this is all essential, managing streaming, VOD, etc. So every company has point people in charge of this, and these are critical functions. So let's dive a little bit deeper. So since you shifted since you added the streaming business into your core MOD business, how has the landscape changed for you in terms of managing data on your titles, on your content? How have your operations evolved?
Well, we actually separated them, because trying to manage them together, it didn't make sense, because we have a manufacturing facility in Illinois, in Chicago, and they have their own group of ops people, and they need what they need. And VOD is completely different. Like, even if we're authoring off of the ProRes files, we still can't use the ProRes files for VOD because the specs are different. So we had to completely separate them and organize it completely differently, which is where MOLTEN came in very, very essential for us to be able to organize everything the way we needed to. And yeah, it's so different. I can't even express it. Like with MOD, we have 3 assets. You have your wrap, you have your disc label, and you have your ISO and your metadata, so 4. And the metadata that's collected for what we need for MOD is way less than what we need for VOD, because every platform has different metadata that they're requesting. Some of it is really intense, and some of it is, some platforms, they just want the basics. So, but we have to collect it all so that we have it when we're ready to deliver.
So let's go down the laundry list. As a sample list of assets or data that you need to collect for any one platform. So if you're delivering to, say, one platform, just pick one, say Tubi or Roku or Pluto, any platform. What are all the data points and assets and spreadsheets and feeds or whatever compilation of all the material that you need to send to successfully go live on a platform? Can you just walk us through everything that you can think of?
Okay, well, when we start out working with a platform and we're submitting a title, we'll have an avail sheet that we send them, and then they look over the avail sheet. Some platforms will take everything on the avail sheet because they just want everything. Other platforms curate, so they'll only take a chunk of them. And depending on which platform it is, depends on how many we can avail to them at a time. So some platforms only want us to avail 10 titles at a time. Others want 40 to 50. So we have to keep track of that too, so that we know that we're not going to overwhelm people. Yeah. And then they pick what they want, and then they email back to us, and that usually takes a month. What kind of blows my mind is how long all of this takes for stuff. But I understand, because the files are huge and everybody's got to watch trailers, and I understand there's a massive process in picking avails. So we'll get our pick list back, and then I go into MOLTEN and make sure we have all the assets for that title. If they've been, they obviously have to be QC'd and all of that before I even pitch them. They have to be QC'd to make sure that we have everything. And then we'll set up a package and then send it over to you, and then you guys deliver it for me. And then I get contact back from the platform saying they got the delivery. And then depending on the platform, it could be 2 weeks to 6 months before the title's live, depending. Wow. And some of the platforms we work with have multiple platforms underneath them, and they do a rotation of the title. So the title might be on this platform for 3 months, and then this platform for 3 months, and they'll do a rotation, and it's still at that base main platform, but it'll jump around the little platforms underneath it.
Gotcha.
But most assets that we have to send to them are, we have a feature file. There's we try to have a generic base model specification, which is becoming harder and harder to do. After this last year, everybody's changed what they require, so it's been a little more difficult. But so you have your feature file. You usually have to send a trailer file.
Right.
Your caption files, that everybody wants closed caption files, and then a poster, landscape, and whether they have some oddball size for whatever. There's usually 1 or 2 oddball sizes from a poster and a landscape, just because everybody wants to look different, and I totally understand that. Yeah. But we work with 17 platforms right now, and out of the 17 platforms, we have 12 art assets that we need to collect from our content providers before we can deliver.
12 art assets?
Just the art assets, yes.
Wow, and they're just 12 because of different dimensions?
Different sizes, yeah. Okay. And I set up a template in Photoshop, which is really slick, and it's all set up in artboards. So all you got to do is just throw them into each size and then save them all as a batch, put your title in front of it, and it's good to go. So we're trying to make things as easy as possible for our content providers and help them out as much as we can. And if it turns out they don't have the means or ability to make them, then they pay a really small fee. We don't usually pad much of our fees for these services. We just want to help them get their assets made so we can go. So we'll do it for them if they need it.
Gotcha. So essentially the process is, first you're in the deal making scenario where you're pitching titles and maybe avails to the platforms. It takes them a while to get back to you and express interest. And once they express interest and there's a delivery requested, then you compile the package with the feature, the trailer, the caption, subtitle, poster, etc. And then you ship that over to them through whatever mechanism that you have available at your disposal. And in your case, you use MOLTEN for that. And once the titles are delivered, then I'm assuming it gets into the revenue reporting stage where they send you revenue reports, and then you calculate producer reports from there. So is that the full pipeline? Did I miss anything?
I mean, for the most part, yeah, until we have to delist the title, and then you just contact people and tell them that the title's got to come down. And
yeah.
But other than that, it'll stay in that rotation until they pull it down. And
yeah. So have you observed, you said a few things have changed during COVID, particularly in your business. Was there more of a content demand that you saw during COVID, or were there any other major changes that you can think of?
Yeah, well, with everybody being stuck at home entertainment really did blow up. Not only were our content providers submitting immense amounts of titles to have set up, but the ordering from Amazon and Walmart and all of our major retailers just exploded. So our entire business, like we call Christmas of 2020 COVID Christmas nightmare. And then COVID Christmas of 2021, we thought was going to be a little bit more controlled because we beefed up to be able to handle it better. And it turned out 2021 was even more intense. So that was COVID Christmas part 2, and this year we'll see COVID Christmas part 3. Probably we're seeing a small decline, so it shouldn't be as bad. But yeah, it was absolutely crazy. At one point, we had to get some of our executives to fly down to our warehouse to pack boxes because we didn't have enough people to keep up with the demand. It was crazy.
Gotcha. So let's talk about the streaming side of the business. And when you look at the streaming side of the business, let's talk about just any distributor, not just Allied Vaughn.
Okay.
What would be the key challenges that a distribution business will have to deal with given the current landscape?
Obviously, just the amount of different specifications that all the platforms require. It gets to be daunting sometimes because we'll onboard a new platform and then I have to figure out if we have all the assets already, or if we have to create them, or if I have to hunt them down. And that's why I call the VOD landscape it's a safari. I'm on safari in the jungle hunting. Is because and the great thing about it though is that you really end up getting a really good rapport with your content providers because I'm constantly hitting them up. Hey, you have this size, could you send it to me? If you don't, we can make it for you, but I do have a really good relationship with most of our content providers and on a personalized level, because it does get stressful after a while. So everybody, I like to joke around with my content providers and relax them a little bit, but it is a lot. So as long as you're willing to keep up with the jungle and you can go on safari, you're good.
Gotcha. So can we get a little bit more granular? When you say there are multiple specifications, can you give us a few examples? Maybe pick a few asset types and just walk us through a few examples of how different are we talking about?
Well, okay. Some of the platforms have certain volume levels on their audio. Some will allow 5.1 and some won't. Some want stereo. You have some that will allow letterboxing, but others that won't. And if you don't know what letterboxing is, it's the bars, the black bars for widescreen. Some accept SD standard and some don't. So if you have an older film come in and it hasn't been reset to high def yet, then you have to have that done if they want to hit all the platforms. So to have the one-stop shop asset to service everyone is really difficult. The rumor that's kind of been going around is a lot of the platforms are starting to adhere to Apple spec, because Apple spec is a pretty high spec and more generalized. So we're seeing that more and more often. So we're going to start upping our ante on that as well and trying to hit the Apple TV spec. So hopefully if it gets a little bit more standardized that way, it'll be easier. Because I know that we're not the only company dealing with that issue. So.
And what about, if we start with sort of the chronological order of exchange, the first thing that you're exchanging is usually the avails or the metadata. Is that correct?
Yeah, because we need the metadata to set up the title in the database to start with from our content providers. And then,
so when you share that with streamers, are you seeing different specs to share avails and metadata as well?
Yes. Everybody wants different types of metadata. Some want just the real basic, what's the director, cast, crew kind of scenario. And then you have others that want to know not only the cast, but they want the roles that the cast are playing, and they want every little detail. I mean, if I pulled my metadata sheet up right now, it's pretty long. Pretty much everything you can tell me about the film or TV show should be on there.
Yeah. So we have obviously come across a lot of standards working with you and with others in the same space. And, this rings true to essentially every company we work with. It can become a pretty major challenge compiling all these sheets for every title and every delivery in every unique format. So in your assessment, if one were to do this sort of manually on spreadsheets, how much time would it take a distributor to compile one metadata or one avails sheet in a particular format, like say EMA format or the Roku format or the Tubi format?
I mean, if you were doing it by hand and we were submitting, say, even just 20 titles, depending on where you were copying the metadata from, if it was the base sheet that the customer supplied or a database that it had been ingested to, you still have to copy and paste all of those over into the things. And then you have some that want the actual titles of the assets. So any graphic assets, they want the name of the asset. So then you have to look up the name of that asset and put that in there as well. So it's very time consuming. That was one of the biggest things when working with you guys, was having the ability to pull the metadata for each platform from the base metadata in your system. It was vital.
So let's put some estimates here, right? If you were, say, put MOLTEN aside, if you were to just do this by hand, how much time do you think it would take? Would it take 1 day, half day?
I mean, it wouldn't take a day, but if you think, you have one line per title, and you get 20 titles on there, it'll probably take you anywhere from 3 to 5 minutes per title. And that doesn't seem like a lot until you start adding up 20 of them and then getting a new sheet for the next platform, and you have 30 on that one, and the next platform you have 50 on, and then the next platform you have 10. But the time adds up, and it disappears so quickly when you're doing those things, because maybe you have to hunt down what the newest IMDb rating is, because the last time that title was availed was 4 months ago, and that the IMDb rating has changed. So then you have to look up every single IMDb rating on every title on that page to go hunt it down. It is time consuming. Absolutely.
And then what about avail windows? If you were to do this by hand, how would one calculate avail windows?
That's a good question. We usually can avail titles once a month to each of our platforms. Is kind of the average. And if you have a month, you want to make sure that you have new titles that have come in, and you've collected all the assets from them, that could take anywhere from a week to 3 weeks, depending on if there's issues.
Yeah.
Sometimes it takes even more. I have some titles that are still incomplete that I've been trying to hunt assets down for, a couple months. So
Yeah.
people get overwhelmed. So I think we try to like push it out. If I was doing it by hand, it would be about 2 weeks from, I would do half the month. I would let 2 weeks worth of stuff come in and then 2 weeks to set up avails and ship them out for that month window. But with you guys, we don't have to do that. I can pull the sheets like the day that we send out the pitches, which is nice because then it's the most up-to-date sheet that we have, new titles. But
it's these little things in the workflow automation that just add up to less heartburn, I suppose.
Yeah, and metadata is seriously the most time consuming. There are tools to do QCing for feature files that are fairly quick from what I see, and when it comes to metadata, there is no quick way to do it. It's copy paste, hunt, look stuff up, hunt it down from the filmmakers if you have to, and it can get to be kind of a hassle.
Yeah.
But and when you send out the avail sheet, it's different information than the actual final metadata sheet, because the metadata sheet will be the full information on the title that the platform needs. The original pitch sheet is just the rough basics that somebody would need to be able to choose the title, the trailer, just real basic stuff. So
yeah, and I have seen it firsthand. I've had the pleasure of seeing it firsthand, how fragmented and heterogeneous the ecosystem is right now of standards. To just paint a picture, some platforms would require like an Excel sheet or a CSV. Some would require that in an EMA spec, which of course you're familiar with. And for those folks in the audience who are not, just Google out EMA metadata or avails specs and you'll find it freely available online. Just try going through that sheet. It can get overwhelming. And then some platforms would require like a zip file with 3 different CSVs attached. One for movies, one for, series, one for something else. Some platforms want XML sheets. Some platforms want MRSS feeds. So just the first phase of the pipeline can get really complex. And I think that's what we're trying to dive into here.
And then you have some platforms that run off of a form system off of their portal. So I can't actually send them a metadata sheet.
That's right.
You have to go in and by hand enter each title in on a form that you can only enter one title at a time and copy and paste all of that into that form in order for the title to be even considered, and some of them do it with pitches. Or after the pitches, like the accepted titles, you don't have to do that until the titles are accepted. It depends on the platform, but yeah, it's comical actually. Like you have to laugh about it because otherwise, I think you pull your hair out. But
yeah, we all need to just stay a bit sane. What is, a little bit off topic, what is surprising to me is that there aren't API tools available on these platforms to do all this programmatically. Mostly, these things go through some form of manual communication, some form of sheets compilation. And what is strange is that in the year 2020, platforms don't provide programmatic mechanisms of doing this. And it's a sort of a, area where I have an opinion, where I feel it's going to be driven by platforms, suppliers such as yourself, and service providers such as us, urging these platforms and proving to them that we have the capabilities of doing automation and it'll be easier to them.
Yeah.
I know as a fact, almost every week I reach out to these platforms and I urge them to do more automation. And I'm like, hey, we know how to do it. Just let us tell you how to do it. But yeah, I think even they're probably a bit overwhelmed with all the content supply right now.
Oh, absolutely. I do not envy them at all, because not only the submissions are overwhelming, but they're all trying to upgrade their systems to keep up. They're over half of our platforms changed their process and their system just this last year at the beginning of the year. So everybody's trying to beef up to make it as good as they can. And I really do believe that, but
Yeah,
with COVID, it's been hard because, everybody's trying to get on at one time, and it's, yeah,
fair enough.
that's a lot.
So we got a question about E&O insurance, ratings, certifications, music cue sheets on top of the most obvious assets like features and titles. Do you run into that requirement as well?
I mean, occasionally we'll have music cue sheets that we'll need to supply to one or two of our platforms, but it's not a normal request that we deal with the platforms that we work with.
Gotcha.
But I'm sure that is something that will come up more and more. I don't deal with a lot of that stuff myself personally, but when it's required, I'll request it, and then we just push it along.
Gotcha. Then we had another question from the audience around rights. So the question says, I have an Indian language film on Netflix, but AVOD, satellite, and TV rights are excluded from the SVOD license for the first 2 years, license which has 2 years left to run. Can you discuss non-SVOD distribution? So essentially AVOD distribution or TV, TVOD, or other kinds of VOD. We've seen premium VOD as well. So what about non-SVOD distribution? Is the landscape any different?
On my end of it, not really, just keeping track of when it can go on to SVOD, and then being able to time it right where, when it's pitched, it has that amount of time to get set up in systems before it's available, but at the same time, not go before that. And we do have a handful of titles that they're set up for AVOD and TVOD first, or maybe just TVOD first, which is transactional. If you don't know what TVOD is, AVOD is advertising, and then SVOD is subscription. So some of the bigger titles, they'll want to do transactional first and try to get that going, and then once that starts sliding off, then they'll do AVOD to get the advertising on it, and then they'll go to subscription, because they're all different levels of royalty payback on that. So
yeah. Now that begs another interesting question. The distribution business is a lot more than just delivering the asset. There is the whole rights piece, which we are now touching upon from this question. And then there is the whole, accounting piece and the timing piece. Essentially the concept of what goes live when, where, and do you have the rights to do it? And then once it goes live, how do you account for the revenue? Let's take the first piece. How do you determine what goes live where, in the sense that you want to make sure that you have rights for it, right? So what this question was implying was there is some complexity with rights. We have these bundle of rights, but then we monetize the SVOD. Let's assume a scenario where you have VOD rights and you distributed SVOD. There can be dependencies like exclusive or non-exclusive. And then you can slice VOD rights, really thinly these days. And then you can individually distribute AVOD somewhere and PVOD somewhere and, EST somewhere. So how are you keeping track of all these moving pieces when it comes to rights information?
Well, we keep track of it in MOLTEN. Obviously, there's contracts where you can set up the contracts. So you can set up, maybe they have their own contracts with Amazon or whoever, and but so they want to hold us back from submitting there. So then we set that up as a holdback. So anything that would be, you know, TVOD only or AVOD only or all three, if they have holdbacks from other platforms that they have other contracts with, or whatever the case may be, you keep track of all of that under the contracts in MOLTEN. We also have a tracker that we keep track of who restricts what platform from where, and that's kind of my cheat sheet. That's a super quick list to just pull up. So, you know, it's sad that I have to have it two places, but, you know, it's one of those things where having rights and being able to get them to the right places at the right time, or hitting street dates has been very difficult. We're finally starting to explore that option a little bit more to be able to structure that better. But with the time frames, depending on the platform, we just weren't hitting them. So now we're going to try to structure it a little bit better so that we'll be able to hit street dates again. But that's, you know, you have to submit a title and have 8 weeks from the street date to pitch the title. And then there's obvious that they might not pick that title. So, you know, you might not get on that platform anyway to hit that street date. But.
So we've gone down the list of, you know, actions. We talked about metadata, we talked about avails, rights. Let's talk about the big elephant in the room, which is content and delivery. So walk us through what the landscape looks like, all the way from, you know, independent of your operations first, just the landscape, you know, from like FedExing discs to, you know, Aspera and everything in between. Can you paint the picture of what are the options for content delivery?
Well, it depends on what the person has access to. If they're working from home, I always tell them just put everything on a hard drive and mail it to our office. And then somebody at our office will load it to MOLTEN. That's usually the safest bet. And then we also have setting up an S3 bucket with you guys where they can deliver through an S3 bucket. And then you just come out with the file cannon, which is super awesome. It's like an FTP client. And I actually really love that. I just want to let you guys know that that's amazing, because now we can load things directly to each title within the database. And you can,
the association piece.
Yeah, and you can load multiple things at one time.
Yeah,
it's beautiful. So yeah, otherwise, you know, I talked to someone this morning who is in the UK, and you guys can set up a UK S3 bucket for them. And I think that's awesome. So then it's a faster delivery on his end and a faster collection on your guys' end. So it's pretty cool.
So that's, you know, that's the good life with MOLTEN, I suppose. If you, let's say one did not have MOLTEN and they were looking at receiving content from their producers and delivering content to platforms, can you think of what are the options on the table for such an operation?
Well, because the ProRes files are so large, I mean, you're looking at 100 gigs on average, if not more.
Oh yeah.
You know, that's
on the low side usually.
That's on the low side. But still, transferring 100 gigs, even on the low side, via the internet is difficult if you do not have a high-speed connection or whatever. So it would be hard drives in, and then some of the platforms have S3 buckets, but some of them don't. Some of them are still using regular FTP, which can take forever. So, you know, I imagine it's difficult. You know. Yeah.
So to put some real numbers around it, I did the math the other day.
Did you?
Because I was delivering something about 10 terabytes from the East Coast to the West Coast.
Mm-hmm.
And, you know, doing it the way you normally do this, which is through backend servers, you know, MOLTEN powered infrastructure and such. we were able to run that delivery in about 8 hours or 8.5 hours or something overnight. But just as a mental exercise, I was trying to think, what would it take if I were to log into my computer and start uploading it through, a browser or any like interface. So I have Xfinity broadband, which gives me, I think 100 or 300 megs download speed and about 5 megs upload speed.
That's average, yeah.
At that, it was going to take me more than 200 days to deliver that package.
Yeah, some of my content providers that work from home that have like 3, megs of upload speed. They go to queue it up on an FTP load or something, and they're just like, okay, 100 days. And I'm like, yeah, just send me a hard drive. Don't even mess with it, So.
All right, so the final topic we'll touch upon before we look at additional questions from the audience. And by the way, folks in the audience, feel free to just click the Q&A and type in your questions. We're going to dive into that in just a sec. So we've kind of touched upon a little bit during, the earlier part of this conversation about how you use MOLTEN. Let's put that in perspective.
Okay.
Where did MOLTEN come into the picture? What operations are you running on MOLTEN? How does it facilitate automation or easier operations in your life? Like, put this in context. What are you doing on MOLTEN?
Okay, so when a title comes in and is submitted by one of our content providers, I'll go into MOLTEN, set it up in MOLTEN. I'll need the metadata from them first. Because then as I'm setting up the title, I have to also set up the contract for that title so that all the rights are in there. And then we have it set up so that we have child accounts with you guys where our content providers can log in themselves to load their own assets if they have the capabilities to do that. Yeah. So, but the title has to be set up first with the contract, and then I can give the content provider the go ahead to load their assets if they have the capabilities to. So either they will load the assets up, or I will grab the assets from either a hard drive or wherever it's been loaded and then throw it up for them. And then all the metadata has to go in and be ingested. And in the beginning, we were having to copy and paste in, but now you guys have the metadata ingesting, which is awesome. Yeah, huge time saver. And then once the title is in MOLTEN, then we go through our avails, right? And so I can go in there and figure out what avails, where have they been pitched, and if they haven't been pitched somewhere, then they get to then they get on the next list. And so then MOLTEN has the being able to take out each form for each different platform. So if I need if I need Hoopla, or if I need Redbox, or I need whoever, I can go in there, I pick who I want the metadata sheet for. If it's an avail sheet or if it's an actual solid metadata sheet, there's usually 2. And then you just list out the titles that you need for the avails, and then it kicks it out to me and emails it to me. And then we can move on with that. And then when it comes to the titles that are picked, we build a package and pick just the assets that need to go to that platform. And then I email it, or the form sends it to you guys, and then you guys send it out and then get back to me, let me know that the package has been delivered. But you also have the settings in MOLTEN, so I can actually go in and see if it's still pending or if it's been delivered yet. And then you have a distribution button, which is awesome, where I can actually say, okay, this is being distributed here. So it'll automatically mark in MOLTEN where it's already been shipped, where it's been pitched, where every single step gets recorded. So then when I go into a title, say a content provider calls me up and says, hey, where is my title at? Where have you, who's grabbed it? Then I can go into MOLTEN under the distribution tab, and I can see, okay, well, we pitched it here, it's been delivered here. It was pitched at this date on this time, but it didn't get delivered till this time, or it's live here. We can mark all of those in, which is really good way to track everything, so we know where everything is.
Yep. That sounds good. So you're doing metadata, avails, contracts, access to producers so they can upload their own content there and, you know, get the child account access, as you put it. And then you run the deliveries and track all the delivery and pitching status. Yeah, I think that kind of covers the use cases. Did we miss anything?
I mean, I don't use the financials on MOLTEN, but I know you guys have financials, and I think that's brilliant. That's not my area, so I don't use that very often. But
Sure.
you know.
Okay. So let's dive into some questions from the audience here. So it says, clearly Allied Vaughn Entertainment has the ability to place programming on many platforms, but how does the programming get marketed? Does Allied Vaughn Moviesing service address that?
That is also not really my forte. I know that we do have a marketing team, and we do promotions on Moviesing, and we do send out a newsletter, and we promote titles to our retailers and give them sale sheets and promotions to use as well. As for any more further promotions, I know that they are available. I just don't know what they are because I don't do that. But if you need help and you are a content provider of Allied Vaughn, I send you over to our marketing team and they can take care of you.
Yeah, that's fair.
I'm pretty sure.
So another question we have. Sorry, can you say that again?
Oh, I said I think we do social media posts as well.
Yeah, fair enough. Another question we have is, do you have to ask platforms to delist titles? What if they don't keep track of that? Is it normal to have overuse problems?
Normally, like when we send the metadata to them, it will say a start date and an end date, or a sunset date, which would be a delisting date. But our contracts with our content providers are renewable. So we don't really have true sunset dates unless the content provider tells us that their license will expire at that time. So when that happens, they'll usually notify us and say, hey, by June 30th, this title has to come down, or July 1st. So then I just email my contacts at the platform and let them know. And I have not had a problem with them not taking them down when they've been notified. But it's usually a per title basis, you know, when it arises. So.
Yeah, you know, I can probably add a little bit from the automation side there. At least using MOLTEN, one of the other features you would get is if there is a title that has a contractual expiration date, and it's, you know, it may not be for the entire title and all rights. It may just be, you know, this is the end date for the AVOD rights, and this is the end date for the free TV rights, and you know, it may be different based on rights. It may be different based on territories. It may be different even based on languages and things like that. So all of that can be tracked in MOLTEN, and it'll give you error reports if, you know, anything's going over. It'll appropriately handle the avails. Essentially, it'll give any rights collisions, errors, and such. So having that in your back pocket can also help ensure you don't have any such, you know, just oversight issues.
Right. And what I love about MOLTEN when it comes to that is, if you have a title that is set up in the contracts and maybe somebody else is pulling the avails for you, like in my case, like if my ops person is pulling the avails, they don't necessarily know it's in the contract. So they're just putting in titles. And if it turns out that title doesn't hit those rights that we're pulling the avails for, it just blacks the title out and it won't print it, which is awesome. So it's like a fail-safe kind of scenario. Yeah.
Yeah, you know, it's so interesting that all these pieces have to work together to make a successful distribution business. It cannot just be, you know, your rights, or you know, your assets, or you have your metadata, you have, you know, access to your producer. Everything has to come together.
Yeah.
All right, let's keep powering through the questions here. Good questions coming in. So let's see. Once you decide to distribute a particular film, for how many years do you sign it for typically? More of a business question. Do you have an opinion on that?
I mean, normally we do 3. I think our contracts are 3 years, but they, like I said, they auto renew unless we're told differently. So we do a lot of non-exclusive rights. So we try to, the 3-year mark is kind of the loop over.
Okay, so we have a few vague questions like how much are streamers paying for content? And that may not be pertinent here unless we have additional details. You know, how streamers are paying for content, at least as far as I know, is you would get financial reports based on how they've monetized the content. It could be based on advertising, or it could be based on subscription revenue.
Yeah, it totally depends on the platform.
Yeah, it depends on the platform.
Too in-depth. Yeah, it's too
in fact, you know, we're sort of scratching the surface of another can of worms, is the royalties calculation. Right. And you mentioned that MOLTEN has a solution there. So if you know, anyone in the audience is interested in learning about automation for royalties, just shoot us a note. We have probably time for one more question. Okay. Is there, okay, so I see one question. Are rights usually worldwide or mostly domestic? Do you handle other territories? Quick answer for that.
You know, it's I would say in general, most people have worldwide rights, but there are a handful that are North America only, or all worldwide except Japan. That's a common one. Yeah. So tackling that is also, it can be a struggle sometimes, but mostly not. I mean, as long as they're written out in the contract and it's noted in the avails that go out to platforms, it's under their control and keeping within those rights. So, yeah.
You know, we had another one of these webinars earlier, and the guests were talking about how, you know, they have titles where the same title has been acquired by multiple suppliers, because each one has a little sliver of a right. So they get like this territory from that producer or distributor and this territory from somebody else. And then when you're counting for revenue, it gets a little bit more complicated. I see there are questions here. We're unfortunately out of time. I know this is a fun chat and we'd love to continue. So for anyone who wants to continue the conversation, feel free to shoot us a note at contact@moltencloud.com. And if you need an introduction to Allied Vaughn, shoot us a note. We'd be more than happy to connect you with Jessi and other folks at Allied Vaughn. We do at least once a month a webinar of this sort where we tackle the nitty-gritties of media operations and try to distill, you know, mega macro factors down to the actual hands-on action. So hopefully you enjoyed this. Jessi, pleasure talking to you as always. Thank you so much for making time.
Thanks for having me.
We'll here. Any final thoughts, Jessi?
Just, you know, keep submitting those titles. Like, just keep it rolling. So, yep.
All right. Well, thanks again. Thanks for everyone who made time to join us today. And we look forward to staying in touch with you. Again, email is contact@moltencloud.com. Have a good one. Bye.
Thanks.